Welcome to the Senior Moment podcast, where we dive into topics that deal with seniors and senior living. If you are a senior, work with a senior, or have a senior in your life, this is the podcast for you. You never know what topics will be discussed in each and every episode. Hosted by Cindy Cannon and Brady Tabbs. This is the Senior Moment podcast. Welcome. We are excited to have Pastor Brandon Metcalf with us today from Zion Lutheran in Bethalto. We've asked him to come and join us today and talk a little bit about grief, especially during the holiday season. We know that seniors experience a lot of grief, a lot of loss in their lives, and this is a difficult time for them. So, Pastor Brandon, why don't you start and just intro yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
So thanks for having me on. I came all the way from across the street. Our church is just right down the road from Villa Rose here. And it's great to be here. I've been at Zion as pastor for about 2 years and grew up in St. Louis before that. So kind of familiar with the area. I've got a wife and a couple of kids at home. And my kind of role at the church there, so my official title is Associate Pastor of Family Ministry, which basically means I do all the pastor stuff plus minister to our families with our church and our school. And so about, let's say this is the fifth year we've done this event. We do a Surviving the Holidays event every year. And so it started in 2020. So I was at Zion as a vicar, which is basically like a fancy word for internship. The vicar actually means in place of. So in place of a real pastor, they were stuck with me. That's what I would always tell people. And then they called me back. So apparently it worked out just fine. But so 2020 was kind of a weird year. I don't know if you remember much of what was or wasn't going on at the time. And so we had at the beginning of that year, so my family, we were expecting our second child. She was actually stillborn at 39 weeks. And this was right before the pandemic. And so we had her funeral in February. The world shut down 3 weeks later. We end up moving here. And so I had kind of a special place in my heart for people who were grieving in 2020 because we were able to have a funeral. We had the service. We had people that, visited us, brought meals, that kind of, like we were at the tail end of that. And then, coming here and, in my role at the church was meeting all sorts of people that you had maybe 10 people at the funeral. You didn't get to invite families from out of town.
Correct.
Some you didn't even have a normal service. So the normal grief markers that are tough, but actually are the very things that in the long run help us to continue to kind of take the next step. A lot of those were lacking. And so what kind of started my journey through helping people specifically with grief at the holidays was we were trying to figure out what are some things we can do to resource, our community in this time. And so in 2020, I said, we need to do something for people in the holidays. And that led to our first Surviving the Holidays workshop. We've done it 5 years now. And actually this past year, we ended up we're now like a host. We host a grief share. A group. Grief Share is a large organization throughout the country and probably the world. But we now have a group that we facilitate kind of in conjunction with this. And just trying to meet some of the needs of the club that no one wants to be a part of, but even more than you don't want to be a part of it, you don't want to think you're the only member of the club. And that's really kind of what we're trying to do with our grief ministry.
Absolutely. I was going to say that there's my little tick. Thanks, Fred. Most people are going through some type of grief and we don't realize it, right? Yeah.
Can you give us a brief description of your organization?
Yeah. So, I mean, our church overall we've got Zion Lutheran Church and school. We have pre-K through 8th grade school. And then the church, we've been there for since 1856 or something like that. This school is about 60 years old in its current form. And so Zion's kind of been a part of the Bethalto community for a long time. Our like I said, our kind of grief program grew out of, we had an organization called Stephen Ministries. We had a group here that it's basically people that are cared to do lay caring ministry, help listen, kind of walk through life. We had that for about 30 years at Zion. And some of those leaders, as they were figuring out in a post-pandemic world where maybe one-on-one caring, people are looking for something a little different, some of those skill sets ended up leading into this group. And so we've had 2 full sessions of Grief Share now, in addition to the 5 annual Surviving the Holidays events. And our 3rd Grief Share support group will start up in January.
And just the church in general is, I mean, the membership is quite large. I mean, I've only been really in the Bethalto. I mean, I've been here at Villa Rose a little over 5 years, and so I haven't been super involved in the community, but it seems to be one of the largest religious organizations in the Bethalto area.
Yeah. We're, again, as everyone kind of getting more people connected, in person. Now we're back up to about 350 to 400 on any given weekend.
Yeah.
Plus the nebulous people are watching us online, and it's hard to know who is that? Is it?
Yes.
Because the tracker tells you how many devices. Is that one person? Is that
a family of 5?
Yeah.
Correct.
Or is
exactly.
that being streamed in the video room at Villa Rose?
Right.
And how many people is that?
Right. That is true.
Yeah.
Right. We live stream the service here. So yeah, I say it's wonderful. You can just head right down there and not have to get out in the cold.
We have a couple of members that they come Saturday nights oftentimes, and that they live here at Villa Rose. And so we'll see what I say tomorrow.
Exactly. There you go.
It's on my tour script.
Yeah, it is on your tour script about that we do live stream the service.
Awesome.
So as the holidays approach, talk with us a little bit about grief and how it can affect some people.
Yeah. So oftentimes we think of it in terms of the first holidays after a loss is kind of the primary place. But that doesn't mean that any other holiday you don't experience. And actually, some people have a really good first year, and it's year 2 that just hits them like a ton of bricks. Maybe because they didn't expect it, but oftentimes it's when you're in your normal routine, you can kind of manage the grief a little bit differently. But it's those key moments where everyone's gathered together. That's when you realize not everyone's here anymore, and so grief that maybe has been put off or pushed aside almost always comes out in the holidays. And part of what it's helpful to try to do in those moments is to allow yourself or whoever it is in your family or whoever you're walking through, allow that grief to happen. One of the things I say oftentimes in working with people on this is that grief that isn't walked through ends up being acted out in some way. And so if I'm not going to work through it or walk through it, I'm going to end up acting it out, whether it's getting super upset about some random thing that happens at the Thanksgiving meal. Like it's not about the cranberry sauce. It's about the frustration of whatever it is. And so to help people realize that, in fact, actually, maybe it's being sad, maybe it's, adjusting what we're doing, but some of those things actually help us to avoid worse emotional outbursts if I don't manage it in a positive way.
It can look completely different. Holidays can look completely different.
Yeah.
I mean, I think back to just 5 years ago. I mean, my mom and dad always hosted. Now both of them are gone. Like, holidays aren't the same. It's a complete different. It's just completely different.
Yeah.
And
yeah. It's hard for people to navigate. Well, what should I do? What do we do? And that's where a lot of the difficulty comes in grief in the holidays. It's not necessarily the grief, it's the anxiety, the stress, and the worry that I'm doing something wrong. And that's really the issue at the holidays is either the idea that, well, it's Christmas and so I'm supposed to be happy. And so I fake being happy until eventually that kind of falls apart, or we have to do everything the same way. And so, grandma wanted us to do this, or my sister or my child or whoever it is that you lost, that we end up kind of trapped in these traditions that maybe it's okay to let go, but we think we still need permission from from someone else. And so sometimes it's the feelings of grief, but oftentimes it's the pressure that we put on ourselves, or well, it's perceived pressure.
Right.
Rarely is it actual pressure.
Right.
But and so really it's this stress and worry that, well, what's going to happen if I break down, or if I can't handle this, or whatever. And so we end up kind of overwhelmed, maybe even before the holiday starts, because we're so
Right.
worried about what's going to happen, that and that kind of creates this unique environment in the holidays when maybe we're experiencing, or one member of the family is really experiencing not just this grief, but the kind of stress and anxiety around it, and maybe everyone else isn't. And so then on both ends you have this weird, well, am I doing this wrong, or are you doing this wrong? And because we tend to like operate on this script that, well, grief is supposed to, like, here's the way to do it. And our natural assumption is, if someone else is grieving differently than me, we tend to think we're doing it right and they're doing it wrong. It's
Right.
I think married couples, especially, if you lose a parent, or lose a child in that relationship, where you go, well, you're not talking as much, or you're, those kind of things. It's because we naturally assume, well, I'm doing it right, and so someone else doing it differently is wrong, rather than the reality, which is you're grieving in different ways, and that's okay.
That's one of our questions coming up, but you bring it up now. Is everybody, some people shut down, some people, there's so many different ways you can deal with it. And my brother, I'll touch on this real quick. My brother passed away in September of 16, and birthdays are big.
Yeah.
Birthdays are big for my mom. And I remember last year, my brother called, and you get busy, and honestly, you don't think about it. My brother called me in the evening and said, "Have you called mom today?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, it's Brian's birthday." And I called her, and she hadn't got out of bed all day because she still has trouble with birthdays, his birthday.
Yeah.
Wow. I was going to say, we celebrate mom and dad's birthday, so we always go out to dinner as a family. It's like they celebrated birthdays. It was a big deal. Your birthday was a big deal. I celebrate birthdays. Come on, Brady, you know that.
Yes, yes, we do.
I'm always
Right up the road.
celebrating.
No, I'm just kidding.
I'm always celebrating. Although some people just say I'm just looking for a reason to celebrate. But anyway, so we do that on their birthdays. That's how we kind of recognize.
That's a good idea. That's
we
a real
just
good
like
idea.
where was their mom's favorite place was Moonlight. So anybody in the family, we're going to Moonlight. Dad was Texas Roadhouse, so that's where we're heading. Yeah, it's not always easy.
Yeah.
I remember the first holidays without them, especially like you were talking about the traditions. It was always, this is, you never even kind of thought what you were doing for the holidays, because you knew what you were doing for the holidays, because if you didn't do it, mom was coming after you. So, so the expectation was there. You never even thought about it.
Yeah.
And then, the first year she wasn't there, it's like, ooh. But we still had dad, but then you didn't have dad. And then it's just different when you don't have both of them.
Yeah.
There's almost this orphan-like feeling, because, I was very blessed to have great parents who loved and cared for me no matter what. And you always knew they had your back. It did not matter. I could do something really, really wrong, and my dad would be like, "I'm not sure what you were thinking, but I'm still here for you."
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But then when you don't have that, there are moments when you're like, whew, which is why as siblings, we were like, and not every family has that, but we kind of made a pact between ourselves that when dad passed away, there's not one thing that's ever gonna interfere with this, because we have each other, and that is it. And mom and dad would want us to be there for each other, because that's what they would want. And so, but not everybody has that.
What's the saying? You don't know what you got till it's gone.
It is absolutely correct. I was going to say, when my dad passed away, there was a gentleman that came through the line and said to me, you hit the lottery with parents. You just probably didn't realize it.
Mm-hmm.
Had no idea.
Yeah.
Not really in the moment. No. For sure.
And being able to honor that in an authentic way. So
Absolutely.
maybe it's hey, there's a new tradition we're going to celebrate
Yes.
their birthdays, and that's to find ways to carry on that the legacy, or the memories, or just that so grief and love are two sides of the same coin. And so in order to grief is always an express. We don't grieve things unless that there's some kind of love attached to it. And so to act out grief is also a way our love for that person continues. And so whether it's and that the first year especially, like, some people jump too far into we got to do a new tradition. We need to, like, we're going to do a 5K run, in honor of this person, and go, let's just make it through the year.
Right.
And then after that, maybe you start evaluating, and you go, hey,
Right.
what are the things that they loved, that we love, that maybe there's a connecting point there where we can find a way to carry on whether it's a new tradition, or something that's maybe the same, that helps you to remember, but also you're continuing to move forward, on the one hand without the person, but on the same hand, you're with that person too,
Sure.
but just in a different way. And we get into trouble when we try to keep everything kind of, well, we can't change anything ever, and or when we go, well, we can't talk about it. We can't talk about that person. We can't, if we talk about mom, or grandma, or whoever the person's name is, then that's gonna ruin the day. Like that, there's nothing worse than grief that is unspoken at all. Like, say your loved one's name, and maybe it's as simple as, mom would really loved being here. Something like that, simple like that. It really is healing and powerful.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
Absolutely.
Could you briefly touch on the stages of grief?
Yeah. So in terms of kind of the theory of grief, so Kubler-Ross is the main theory. This was in the 60s when she came up kind of with it. And it was from her experience of working with actually people that were dealing with long-term illness, or serious illness. And as she was going through this, realized actually this is the stages of grief. But she learned it from people that weren't dead. They were actually grieving stuff that was a plan of their life that wasn't going to be achieved. And so it's a pretty helpful kind of point walking through any kind of grief, whether it's, well, I thought my career was going to go this way, or I thought this, or we're grieving with a conflict that's going on, or as well as the loss of a loved one. But kind of the first stage is denial, which is that it's most acutely felt in the this isn't real kind of a thing, where you're walking through a fog, and for
Like it's a bad dream.
yeah, and you go, eventually I'm gonna wake up. And especially if the loss is sudden, if it's traumatic, if it's unexpected, that stage can last a lot longer. We don't want to live in that for years and years and years, but that there is a lengthened time whenever there's an unexpected nature to the loss. And so denial is basically, this isn't real. Eventually we're going to wake up from this. And in that moment, you don't need someone to tell you why you're wrong, or anything like it's it's true, but your feelings haven't caught up yet, and that's okay. And so you kind of move from denial to then anger, whether sometimes it's self-directed anger of here's what I could have done differently, whether it's a conversation I wish I would have had, or oftentimes people will think of last words. Oh, the last conversation I had with that person is not what I would have
Yeah.
wanted it to be.
Uh-huh.
And so sometimes the anger is directed inward. Sometimes it's directed at the loved one. That we tend to we maybe remember all the flaws, and we miss some of the gifts that were given. It's anger at God for why would you allow this to happen? And that's that phrase, or that phase is, it simply has to be experienced, and it's a natural. I mean, from a pastor's perspective, I always tell people, like, God can handle your anger. He's okay, but you can't. So you have to let it out. You have to be honest.
Yeah.
And so we kind of move denial, anger, and then bargaining is the next one, which is some sort of, well, if I do this, then maybe this will be different. And we try to, whether it's reason with God, or with ourselves, with someone around it, to try to undo, or somehow make things worthwhile. This is sometimes where people kind of think of the legacy of the loved one, and how, well, if I do this, if I carry on their memory, then it's,
Right.
and which can be positive, but oftentimes ends up with, we walk around with like this kind of chip or baggage on our shoulder, that for the rest of my life, like, my parents sacrificed everything for me, and so therefore I have to be great. You think about Saving Private Ryan, the very, it's what, 25 years old. We can probably spoil it a little bit.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
it's a
You're
war.
probably okay.
It's a war movie. Not everyone makes it.
Right. Exactly.
And so at the end of the movie, there's a line that's spoken to one of the survivors, and he simply says, "Earn this." And then it fast forward to that same person decades and decades later, at the grave of those who died for him, and he just breaks down, and he tells his loved, "Tell me I was good," because he'd been living his whole life basically in this bargaining stage of, I have to earn
it.
or earn everything that's been given for me, and ultimately, like, that's not the healthy stage that we want to kind of live in. And so we kind of move from uh, bargaining, and then depression is the last one, and that's ultimately like recognizing there's nothing I can do to change this. And again, that's also not the place we want to ultimately land. And then the last phase is acceptance. Now, as a pastor, I would slightly tweaks, some of the end of that. I would ultimately say that acceptance, but also hope, it is the end. We talk about that through hope of a reunion, hope of, the world to come, that kind of stuff, that ultimately it's a deeper kind of acceptance. There's actually been a sixth one that's been added since then. Kubler-Ross has like co-published that study with someone else, that her partner in the work there actually added a sixth phase called a purpose, where you find some sort of a purpose beyond the grief, or even through the grief. But there are stages that it's not a linear path through, and I think that's what people go, "Oh, I'm on stage 2 now."
Right.
And then all of a sudden you're back on stage 1, and then you jump to 4, so grief is not linear, it's cyclical.
Okay.
And so we go through these cycles of grief. And when it comes to the holidays, oftentimes we go, "Man, I'm doing really well. I maybe I may have reached acceptance." And all of a sudden,
You're back.
You're right back to it. And that's a natural part of the process. It's constantly going through these cycles.
I was going to say, I think seniors here have such not only have they lost loved ones, whether that is family members, spouses, they also have the loss of some of their independence. And I mean, their worlds look completely different. And so when as we work with seniors, when you were talking about some of those stages, I was just sitting here in my mind thinking, oh my goodness, I can see so many of them going through different stages here as again, I mean, we have residents that have lost children and spouses, and it's just them. And at some point, they're like, why am I still here? And I tell people when we tour here, there is some kind of magic that happens. I can't really explain it. It's hard for me to put into words, but because they're all kind of going through some of the same stages and some of the same processing loss, there's these bonds that are created. I mean, there's these puzzle tables around this place that I swear life's problems are solved at.
Yep.
But there is something happening, and I think this is as we talk about these support, there's something that happens when people come together and share their grief with one another. And as you touched on earlier, they realize they're not alone.
Yeah.
There's some type of healing that comes from that, because that is one of the beautiful things that happens here, is that people find friendship and companionship with people that are going through some of the same things.
Yeah.
And they need each other. They may not realize it when they're alone living at home, but they get here to a community and they find there is healing that occurs when you find people going through some of the same loss.
That's like that's a good analogy, because it's kind of like they're missing puzzle pieces, and coming here, they find those missing pieces.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good analogy.
It was, I want to say, 6 months ago, we had a resident, that lost her son. And this was the second child, and it's only 2 kids. And, I always remember my mom saying, her prayer was that you bury me. I never want to bury my child. It's unnatural.
Yeah.
God didn't, it is just unnatural, right? It's like you bury me. I don't want to bury you.
Yeah.
And painful. And we have so many here. I was going to say, I think as we have like Women's Day events, and women will get up and share some of the things that are and you're just blown away by some of the things that people have been through and some of the loss that they've experienced. You were talking about the tragedy and how when it's a tragic death, sometimes that just that first phase is a little. So we also here have experienced, someone goes to sleep and then they don't wake up.
Yeah.
And isn't it, if we all go around the room and say, if you get to pick the way you go, how would you go? Well,
that's the way they'd want to go.
I vote for that way. Right? I mean, I am independent. I go and I get ready for bed and good night. So, and I wake up and hopefully in heaven.
Yeah, right. Yep.
Right. So that's what I vote for, right? I can tell you here that I have sat with more daughters and cried right along with them, because families struggle with that.
Yeah.
It's tough. It is so tough. And as much as, and I do often say, I understand this is horribly hard on them, on you, but such a gift for them. And but it's still tough. I mean, I had a resident thinking of a couple years ago, maybe 3 years ago, passed away very suddenly. And I saw her daughter a couple months ago, still to this day struggling with that.
Yeah.
Because she didn't feel like she had those last final moments.
Yep.
Like you were saying, you're thinking back.
Yep.
Didn't feel like she had that last final moment. And I have to say, as I think about, Brady, you were talking about your grief experience, and my grief experience looks completely different with my mom versus my dad. I had a long goodbye. My dad had frontal temporal dementia. I got mad at God. Like, why is he having to go through this? He's suffering. And, when you were talking about some of those, but my mom used to always say to me, at some point, Cindy, death becomes a blessing. And I never fully understood that. I looked at her like, what? And then as I watched my dad slowly slip away and agonizingly, painfully, at some point when he passed away, there was a relief for him that he wasn't suffering anymore. And so, I often then, being a daddy's girl, wonder if he didn't have to go through that. I hope not because of me.
Mm.
Because my sister says, I think my mom died pretty quickly. It's very suddenly, brain tumor with her. And my sister said, I'm not sure how you would have handled it if he would have went quickly. And I'm not sure I would have handled it. So I hope that he didn't have to go through that for me. But it was easier to say goodbye because I had 4 years of holding his hand and walking, right? So I also think, obviously, the experience of what the journey looks like. And that's another question. As the director of here, I get so many questions. People ask, how long will I be able to stay here? And everybody's journey looks different. We have no idea knowing what that final journey looks like, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and sometimes we tend to, again, we put a value judgment on one type of experience or the other. And so it's like, this is better, this is worse, this is good, this is bad. And sometimes it's, as we sort through that process to go, okay, with this loss, we had a lot of time and there were blessings in that. And for losses where we didn't have that time.
Yes.
To be able to still reflect on, okay, well, but what do we still have? What
Right.
maybe we didn't have, the ideal kind of way that we would walk through this, but what is it that we did have? We had however many years of marriage, or how many, years with the kids, or whatever the loss is. And sometimes we can put too much importance on those perfect final moments. And the reality is with death and disease, and I mean, very rarely do you get those really good, moments where, kind of the way you would script it. And so I think sometimes it's better to prioritize just the overall relationship. What are some of those, even in cases where maybe that there's some serious conflict, and then a loss happened, and you go, we never worked through any of that. And rather than being
That can be
guilty about
tough.
what you cannot change,
Right.
instead to go back and go, all right, well, what is it that I do have?
Right.
What are the things that I did learn or that I did gain? And maybe it's just, hey, I received the gift of life from my parents, and a lot of the rest of the story might have been real rough,
Right.
but
Right.
but there's again to thank that person for who they were, and to forgive them for who they weren't. And ultimately that's part of kind of that acceptance process. And but it takes time. And that, I think the biggest mistake people make is they think, when I get to that final phase, when I'm done grieving, then I can be back around people again. And that is the worst thing that we can do is, and some of it is maybe the circle is smaller the closer we are to the initial grief.
Mm-hmm.
But there's got to be a circle somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
and to make sure that as I'm working through again these cycles of grief, and having good days and bad days, that we don't wait until the end. When we're the ones grieving, we don't wait until the end to kind of reconnect with the world. But also on the flip side, when we know people are grieving, that we don't wait until it seems like, that things are back to some kind of a new normal. Because 3 weeks after the loss is the loneliest time for someone. It's not right after. It's not the first night. It's
3
not even during the
weeks.
funeral. It's about
Okay.
3 weeks, because that's when the cards stop coming,
Yeah.
the visits stop. You're going through whatever
Life
meals
goes
are
on.
made. Yeah,
Life
and
goes on.
everyone else moves on, but you can't, because your
Right.
day-to-day reality is different. And so what we send out, we have some members that send out some specific grief books, and that, and I try to, with funerals we do here, I try to, in my calendar, kind of about 3 to 4 weeks out, that's when I follow up with that family, because it tries to fill that gap between what everyone else has kind of stopped. And so how can we kind of engage with people, is kind of starting in that
I never thought about that
Yeah.
being 3 weeks, but that makes a lot of sense.
It does make a lot of sense. Absolutely. 3 weeks is the loneliest time.
And I mean,
Mm.
there's probably some correlation between that. That's about the amount of time it takes to start a habit too. And so, you're figuring out, all right, what's what is normal look like? And that's a good time. Again, if you're walking with someone that's dealing with loss, make a little note in your calendar. A couple weeks later, check back in. It really makes a big difference.
And I think that's just checking in, right? I mean, life gets busy and
Mhm.
we, we live in such this social media world that we just, how many people do you really take to lunch or go have coffee with and have these like really connected relationships? Those seem to be few and fewer and fewer and fewer.
Yeah.
I
And
mean,
in those moments if you're taking maybe someone that lost their spouse or a child or whatever the scenario is, hey, let's grab lunch in
right,
a couple weeks. And I think it's helpful to maybe start that conversation, with, do you want to talk about Jeff or not? And to be able to, because sometimes people go, I just want a normal interaction. And we're going to talk about our loved one, but
right,
also like there are other things that we
right,
that we can talk
right,
about,
right,
but
absolutely.
to help that person, off the get go, just, hey, whatever it is that you're comfortable with, to again give that permission to grieve, but also a permission
To
to have a life
to
apart.
live again.
That person had a life
Right,
apart from the grief before then.
right.
You know that
Yeah,
they should still be able to have a life apart from that after that. And
yeah.
It's always nice when somebody can reach out too, because there needs to be more people like that, probably.
Yeah.
I know my mom, she's had a hard time, but and we'll maybe talk about this in a bit, but she's a member of Angel Moms in Jerseyville, it's Jersey
sure.
County, surrounding counties. There's a hundred moms that have lost kids, and some have lost two. And I
Mhm.
couldn't imagine losing one.
Mm.
It's tragic and heartbreaking to think to lose a kid, let alone two. So, but they do crafts. They meet once a month, do crafts, they do a memorial wreath every November for their lost son or daughter. So it's, she finds comfort in that.
So, just as I was saying here, right? These people find these connections with people that have the same, that's exactly what has happened in that situation. These moms of all different age groups have come together with this one common thing. They have this one, they've all lost children, right? So, they somehow can create a bond. I don't know how to explain it. It's hard to put into words what, I mean, we did a video years ago and I'm like, I don't know how to explain it. It's this magic that happens and you almost have to see it and experience it. I mean, I've sat and watched ladies bond together and it's very touching to know that this great friendship has created
Yeah.
because they both are going through losses. I mean, we tend to see a lot of people move in here after the loss of a spouse. Typically 9 months.
Yeah.
Typically 9 months is the trigger point. So they don't wanna leave, and then this loneliness sets in, depression, and the family recognizes, "We gotta get something going," right? So, typically, that 9-month tick, here we see them come.
And being alone can't be good. Being
Yep.
alone can't be good.
Yep.
There's I mean, people really underestimate the social connections. Just eating with someone, just going in and sitting at a meal and eating with someone, they eat more. I mean, the conversation. And so there's something around that, like I said, about that 9-month to a year marker is when
Yeah.
they make a move because really most of the time you hear the loneliness, or especially if they were a caregiver
Yeah.
of a spouse,
Yep.
you'll really see that trigger because they were the one doing, just going. And then boom, their whole
There's nothing to
world.
go for.
Yep.
And I will say that even even myself, even though my dad was in a facility, all three of us kids took turns going and having an evening meal with him. And so, you know, my world was I left here and I went to Jerseyville and fed him dinner 3 nights a week. And now that stops. Like,
Yeah.
it's over. That's a big part. I mean, we did Sunday donuts together forever. And I would leave him and like, I'm coming back. You know what I'm coming with? A donut. You
Yeah.
got it. We had coffee and donuts on Sunday morning. And so, you get in this routine. And so the first Sunday morning, I'm not going to Mr. Donuts and Godfrey on my way to Jerseyville. And I'm going to sit there and sip my coffee and look out the window and tear up a little bit as I think about getting him a donut. Like those kind of things trigger, right? Or like this time of the year, thinking if I close my eyes, I can still hear him coming in singing Christmas Time's a Coming. That was his song, right? So we lived on a farm, and anyway, he as a kid, that was his song. And so you just, so I mean, the other day I popped in the CD because I could, I could just still hear him. So there are things you were talking about holding on to. Like I had said, my mom passed away very suddenly, and I did hold on to a couple of things she did at the end to help me in my grief process,
Yeah.
right? So she was diagnosed, it was a whirlwind, but a brain tumor. We only had 6 weeks with her. It was non-operable, and we were at Mayo Clinic, and there was this surgeon that was telling us what was going on, and my mom had a great faith. And she reached across and patted that guy. Here he had just told her, "You have terminal cancer. We can go in and biopsy it, but this is really what we think it is." And she reached across and she patted him on the knee. His name was Dr. Burns. And she said, "Dr. Burns, I appreciate you letting me know, but I'm going to go home to Brighton. There's a chair there. I'm going to go right to that chair." And she said, "I have believed my whole life that I would meet Jesus. And now I either have to put that into motion because I've believed it, or I have to doubt it. And I'm not doubting. I've lived too long believing that." And so I really held on to that a lot. Like, man, I hope someday that if I'm going through that, I can have that kind of faith and be that strong in the moment, not a tear in her eye, not a and she did. She went home and she sat in that rocking chair, and he told us, he said, she's basically going to start sleeping a lot and she's going to go to sleep and not wake up. And I always said, Mom was a good girl and she got the easy way out. Dad, on the other hand, was a little ornery. He might have paid for it. Now, I don't know that always holds true. Please, nobody send any comments about how bad of a statement that was. But even though it was a little tough on us, right? But I did really, through my grieving process with her, I held on to her belief and her acceptance of it. And that made it easier for us.
Yeah. I mean, that we preach funeral sermons all the time, and people always, go, how hard are those sermons to do? I go, on the one hand, I mean, they're the easiest sermon I preach because it's not really about the person. It's about the promises that God made to that person, and
Right.
and what it's designed to do, and is to give people an anchor point to be able to come back to, again, this is a promise that God made to that person in their baptism, for example, or something like that, where as you experience the grief, you have something else to attach to it. And that's that combination that we're looking for, that we're not going to stop the grief, the doubt, the guilt, sometimes all of that stuff from coming. But what can I maybe add to that so that it's not just this emptiness or this loss? There's also this love and this hope and this faith that it changes the experience rather than removing the experience.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. When my dad did pass away, I instantly thought, well, he hit heaven and hollered, Marge, which is exactly what he did when he came through the door.
Yeah.
And so I tried to focus on the reunion
Yep.
that happened there. And again, obviously I have this great hope and faith that I'll be reunited with them. And
Yeah.
it's just see you later.
Yep.
Not really goodbye. It's see you later. So it's very, very
Faith is so important at those times.
Yeah.
Your faith is the most important thing at those times.
It is. It is. I agree with that. Again, couldn't have been more blessed to grow up in a faith-based home. And I know not everybody gets those, not everybody has those situations, but it's never too late to explore that. And some people sometimes are just looking for something and they just don't know what they're looking for. And,
And I mean, Christmas time is one of the best times to give it a try. Light
That's right.
candles, sing Silent Night. And
Right.
there's something about, again, this simple message, for unto you is born this day, unto
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
And that there's hope.
And, years and years ago, I heard some guy, I can't even tell you, gonna say this and not even give him credit. I got no clue who it is, but I remember him saying, okay, if I'm wrong, if none of it's true, what have I lost? But if I'm right, if I'm a little bit right and you haven't explored it, man, you've lost a lot. And it always did just, are you a gambling type of person? No. I mean, it
Not
really
me.
did. I mean, again, not to turn the conversation into a faith-based
Yeah.
conversation, but
Yep.
really when it comes to grief, it is a big part of it, is that if you have this hope that you will be reunited with them one day, and that, there is, I mean, I think when you were talking about COVID, I mean, we really here, obviously COVID was very challenging in a senior population. And, we started meeting daily, and I led a little daily devotion with the residents. Nobody was coming in. And you want to talk about finding out people just sharing their faith and sharing what some of the things they've been through, and thinking, well, this COVID thing is nothing. We've been through a lot of things and God's been with us. And it was very eye opening, and, got us through a couple of rough years there, And so as we continue the conversation, what kind of tips can you offer during the holiday for families that are dealing with grief, or seniors that are dealing with grief?
I think it's a combination of, on the one hand, having a plan ahead of time, actually thinking through what are some things we normally do, particularly the first year, but even reevaluating each year. That there's things that, like, our family did as we were dealing with grief. There's some things we did the first year that we didn't do in subsequent years. And again, for that to be okay, but to intentionally kind of think about that a little bit. The my caution with that, or kind of the exception to that, is when a loss happens close to the holidays. Most people kind of in the immediate family, are, especially those that were either power of attorney, caregiver, any sort of a decision maker, you experience something called decision fatigue, where you have to decide what are they being buried and what time's the burial. You've made like hundreds of decisions in such a small period of time that your brain, and actually I'd argue like your soul and your spirit, are done making decisions. And so when a loss happens close to a holiday like that, and you're still experiencing that decision fatigue, where you just go, I just can't make a decision. Your planning process then is, I'm appointing this person.
Okay.
You get to be in charge of the meal, or what we're doing. And then if you grant someone or a group of people that power, you have to be okay with whatever it is they do. Like, we can't grant them permission and then get mad at what they decide. Like that's not playing by the rules.
People don't do that, do they?
All the time. Yeah. Yeah. And so again, if I'm going to set up the system where, but it really can be this beautiful thing. And it could be something as simple as, you know what? Thanksgiving's going to be on paper plates this year because that's one less thing I have to do. It's one less decision that has to be made. And that's great.
There's nothing wrong with that.
There is absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't always have to be perfect, right?
Yeah, exactly. And if I can like plan ahead in the holidays and all right, what might be things that there some stressors I can take off, you know, and so maybe it's how we do food or how we do gifts or whatever, you know, that the thing is that to focus in planning on kind of reducing stress, but also don't cut out the person that's grieving. Because
Right.
I think sometimes you know, if someone has the gift of hospitality and you're telling them, nope, your son, your spouse, your loved one died, sit to the side, that actually might not be helping them because they have these gifts that they want to use, and that gift that actually pours into them, you know. And so for as you're looking at the holidays, think through what are things that really drain me and what are things that fill me up, and to think, are there a couple things that drain me that I can maybe pass off to someone else, and are there a couple things that really do fill me up, whether it's music or a hosting or just, you know, a sitting down for a specific kind of, you know, pecan pie or whatever it is. Like, are there some things that really pour into me?
Mhm.
I'm going to focus on those things. And the other aspect to it, when we're grieving, our brains and our bodies are taking up a lot more energy than normally we do. And it seems weird because we go, I didn't do anything all day, and yet I'm exhausted.
Right.
It's actually the process of grief. It puts us almost permanently in our kind of our fight and flight response on a regular basis, which takes up so much energy.
Mhm.
You will need more sleep when you're grieving, especially around, you know, around the holidays. And so maybe you adjust the time of the meal so that you don't have to wake up at 6 o'clock to put the turkey in the, you know, in the roaster or whatever it is that
Right.
you're doing, because like you require, or it's, hey, I've had all this turkey. I'm gonna go take my turkey nap.
There you go.
And someone else is gonna go, you know, because you need that. Like you're going to be exhausted. And so if you think about that ahead of time, you plan for it, and
Mhm.
those kind of things, it's not gonna get rid of the grief, but it's gonna make your experience of it a lot more positive as you're heading into the holidays, and giving yourself permission to grieve, to change things, to maybe keep some things the same and then realize maybe not next year, or, you
Right.
know,
We don't have
that
to do it.
yeah, you know,
Mhm.
but when people feel stuck, that's really the problem. Whether it's stuck in a tradition, stuck in no one lets me do anything, no one wants to talk to me, you know, I'm just crying all the time. And the more we can do to again pour into that person or pour into yourself, as well as with permission remove some of those things that are just draining.
Makes total sense.
What are some resources you could give our listeners?
Yeah, so the main kind of resources grief wise that we share. So we use we have our grief share group that we use, and they have a surviving the holidays program that they use. You can go on their website and find they have some, I mean, just like a one page, which is exactly what you need.
Right.
No one wants to read like a 300-page book on that.
Absolutely.
Just all right, so something that's short. They have a lot of those kind of resources on the holidays. The other organization, again, we had is Stephen Ministries, and they publish a little. It's like a 4-book. Each book is very short, very easy to read. It's called Journeying Through Grief, and those are kind of
Hmm.
meant for about 3 weeks after a loss, 3 months, 9 months, and a year. There's these little booklets, and that walks you through. And the author, as he wrote it based on kind of a ton of research, but also from his own personal story. And so there any if you're looking like books, that kind of stuff, something short, an
Mhm.
article, you know, that kind of thing tends to help. The other encouragement I would offer, as kind of we've talked about here, is grief lives within community. And so whether it's like a grief share group, ours at Zion meets Monday nights, again, starting January 13th, again, But you can go on griefshare.org, type in your zip code and find a group that works for you. We decided to do ours in the evening because some other groups in our area were during the day, and we know that some people needed a different time. And that's one good organization. There's also divorce care. There's any number of other organizations that help with child loss, and but to really take the step of a courageous step to try something, to go to a group, to be vulnerable, to share, it really is worth it in the long run to kind of do that. And the third encouragement I have is, and this is partially because I'm a pastor, find a place to worship, find a community, find a place to find hope on a regular basis. That really does make a huge difference, walking through grief with faith, with hope, and with a community around you.
If someone wanted to come to the group, but maybe, I can see where it's a little intimidating, right? You're coming your first time, like you were saying. So I'm sure a friend could come with them the first
absolutely.
time,
Yep.
right? Don't
Yep.
feel like you have to walk through the doors by yourself.
Yeah. Yep.
I can just imagine sometimes maybe the fear that cripples people. Maybe they want to do it, but they're just. I guess we could always encourage listeners, if you know of someone going through something, don't hesitate to offer to be that person.
Yep. Yeah.
Go right along with them.
One of the most powerful phrases we can tell someone is, "Will you come with me to?" And then we fill in whatever it is. Will you come with me to go see the lights at the Christmas walk in Bethalto? Will you come with me?
Yeah.
To the candlelight service, or will you come with me to this grief group? And again, you're not saying you will come with me. Yeah. That's a different thing. You're always inviting and allowing permission.
I may have been a little more forceful at the kitchen or at the dining room table when we had a staff member ask if she had her Thanksgiving reservation. Her dad passed away here, and she is working now with us. And she's like, "Well, I always came to have Thanksgiving dinner with him, and he's gone." And I was like, "Well, you're coming with me to my family Thanksgiving." I said, "You are coming." And she said, "Okay." And I picked her up and took her.
That's
and
awesome.
She did say, she's like, "That was great. We're a loud and very obnoxious family." I'm like, "Sorry." But she's like, "No, I loved it actually." And so, but I didn't, I thought, I wouldn't want to be alone. And that's what she did, was come here and have Thanksgiving dinner with her dad. And so
that's awesome.
She, it didn't even hesitate. Just, "You're coming with me." And she was like, "Oh, okay." And she came. So maybe not as forceful as me. Will you come?
So knowing the relationship, some
There
relationships, it takes a certain amount of relational currency to kind of, you're pushing your chips in, all in at that point. But if you've earned those chips,
we were pretty close. I think we were okay.
Yeah, that's great.
I picked her up. She came. Oh. So I was going to say, as we kind of wind things down, Brady, you want to ask?
How can people reach out and connect with your organization?
Yeah. So in terms of like Zion as a whole, we live stream our services, and if you search Zion Bethalto on YouTube is kind of where we host that now. You can find our services, our sermon. We're 625 Church Drive. If you know where Villa Rose is, you can probably find us where the church on the corner with the cemetery right up the street.
I take a left every day, though, by the kids playing off to the left.
Yep,
there is another church. So if you just say the one with the cemetery.
Yeah, the one with the cemetery is helpful. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yeah. And again, we've got our Christmas services, but our normal weekend, 5:00 Saturdays, 8:15 or 10:45 on Sundays. So we also have a sermon podcast. If you don't want to watch the whole service, just the sermon, you can do that too. That's listen to that as you go, and you can always reach out to me. You can call our church office 618-377-8314. Otherwise, and I'm Pastor Brandon. I don't have to be your pastor in order for you to reach out, but that's we're here to serve, and so anything we can do to help our community, that's what we're here for.
We definitely appreciate you coming in today. And this was a great conversation. I think, as we've talked, it's so evident that grief impacts each and every one of us in some way. And sometimes you don't realize what people are going through. And it's just reminds us all to be mindful during the holidays, especially because it is kind of sometimes surviving the holidays. And we, again, want to thank you for coming in and sharing with us.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation, and hopefully people will take advantage of the support group that's right here in our area. And that's great that you guys meet weekly. I think both of Brady and I were shocked to hear that. We were thinking maybe monthly, and we really appreciate that. That's a great community service. So thank you so much for coming today. We appreciate it. And thanks everyone for tuning in. And we encourage everyone to take care.
Thank you for listening to the Senior Moment Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, we invite you to like, follow, and share wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. We hope you'll join us next time. Take care, everybody.